You earn more than you did years ago, but you still have that nagging feeling of always being behind, as if the money comes in, but it's never enough to bring the peace of mind you imagined you'd have at this point in your life. This feeling is silent. Almost no one admits it, but it appears in stray thoughts before bed, in the anxiety of looking at your bank statement, in the constant comparison between where you are and where you thought you'd be. Have you ever experienced this? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. Many people experience this exact contradiction. They work more, earn more, take on more responsibilities, but still feel financially insecure. And before you think this is due to a lack of effort, discipline, or intelligence, it's important to make something clear. It's not. This discomfort doesn't originate externally. It originates internally. It's linked to financial mindset, to the repeated decisions made daily, and to how you react emotionally to money, especially when the pressure increases. There's a little discussed truth about this, something investors like Warren Buffett have always pointed out simply. The problem is rarely how much you earn, but how you think and behave in relation to money. When you start looking at it from that angle, a lot of things begin to fall into place. And that's exactly where this conversation starts to get deeper. And perhaps most importantly, realize that this discomfort isn't unique to you. Many people watching now feel exactly the same way, but never had the space to talk about it without seeming weak, confused, or ungrateful. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far, or which part seemed to describe something you've felt but never quite been able to explain. Sometimes, writing is the first step in organizing what was just making noise inside, and when someone reads and identifies with it, that conversation gains even more strength. If at any point you've thought, "That's me," liking the video is a simple way to show that this type of reflection needs to continue reaching more people. It's not about numbers, it's about impact. Each interaction helps this content reach those who are also experiencing this same silent confusion with money and thinking the problem is a lack of effort, when in reality it's something much deeper. And if you feel that this type of conversation helps you see your relationship with money in a more honest and clear way, subscribing to the channel is a natural way to continue following this type of content. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of message, creating a community of real people going through real challenges, because there's still a lot of important stuff behind this feeling that almost no one admits to feeling. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this discomfort that almost no one admits to feeling is often misinterpreted, even by those who experience it every day. You look at your own history and see progress. You earn more than before. You have more responsibilities, perhaps even more comfort. But inside, the feeling is one of being behind, as if you're always owing something to the future, as if the ground is never firm enough to truly relax. And this creates a silent confusion, because rationally everything seems to indicate that you should be doing better, yet the weight remains. It's important to state this clearly. This feeling doesn't mean failure. It's not a sign of incompetence or lack of effort. On the contrary, it often appears precisely in people who strive hard, who make commitments, who try to do what is right. The pain arises when there is a gap between what you have built externally and what you feel internally. And this gap is not created by the external world, but by the way your financial mindset has been shaped over time. Many people have been taught to associate money only with survival, reward, or relief. They work hard, get tired, earn a little more, and use that money as a kind of emotional compensation. This happens automatically, almost unconsciously. Decisions are not made strategically, but based on feeling. Relief now, comfort now, momentary tranquility. And when this becomes the pattern, even growth begins to generate anxiety instead of security. This is where the hidden truth begins to emerge. The problem isn't how much you earn, but how you react to money. It's in the repeated decisions, the small habits, the logic that guides each daily choice. Money comes in, solves the immediate problem, and disappears. The future is always postponed, and living like this creates the constant feeling of chasing after something, even while moving forward. What's most disconcerting is realizing that this pattern doesn't depend on rent. People with very different salaries feel exactly the same way, because the feeling of being behind doesn't stem from numbers, it stems from a lack of internal control, from the absence of clarity, from the feeling that everything can fall apart at any moment. When there's no predictability, the mind never rests. The body lives on alert, and this accumulates silently throughout the journey. This is one of the hardest revelations to accept, because it takes the problem out of the external world and brings it inside. It's not the market. It's not just the cost of living. It's not just the salary. It's the way you've been conditioned to think about money. And that's not a fault. It's an emotional, social, and cultural inheritance. But as long as this isn't acknowledged, the feeling of internal poverty continues, even with apparent progress. When you start looking at this discomfort honestly, something changes. It doesn't solve everything, but it organizes things. You realize you're not broken, just operating under a logic that wasn't designed to generate security but rather constant survival. This realization is uncomfortable but also liberating, because from that point on, the journey ceases to be a blind race and begins to gain awareness. This is where many people feel a mixture of relief and unease. Relief at understanding that they are not alone. Unease at realizing that the problem is deeper than they imagined. And it is precisely here that this conversation begins to take on another level, because when the root of the discomfort becomes clear, it opens up space to see decisions in a different way, with more intention and less impulse. At the end of this section, leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is where the invisible psychological error lies that hinders the progress of many people without them realizing it. At some point in life, an increase in income begins to be interpreted as synonymous with financial improvement. It seems logical to think that way. If you earn more, you should be better off. But this association creates a silent trap. Money increases, the standard of living follows suit, expenses become more sophisticated, and the internal feeling remains the same. The scenario changes, but the structure remains fragile. It's like changing clothes thinking that this changes the path. What happens behind the scenes is that most people react emotionally to money. It becomes an answer to accumulated fatigue, a reward for effort, compensation for a heavy routine. And when money takes on this emotional role, each increase in income is quickly absorbed by new commitments. A better rent, a better car, more expensive habits, decisions made to alleviate the present, earn more, spend better, still without any margin. The relief is short-lived, but the pressure grows. This dynamic creates a cycle that's difficult to perceive while you're in it. Financial life becomes a sequence of constant adjustments, solving the month's problems, paying the bill, balancing the accounts, reorganizing the next step. Everything revolves around the immediate present. The future is always postponed, treated as something that will be resolved when there's extra time or extra money. And since that moment never arrives, the feeling of being behind becomes permanent. The hidden truth is that real financial progress isn't just about how much money comes in, but about how much is left over in terms of space, control, and predictability. When there's no margin, money just circulates faster. It comes in and goes out more intensely, but doesn't build a foundation. Those who live like this feel constantly financially busy, always dealing with something urgent, but never truly making progress. The impact of this doesn't just show up on the bank statement. It appears in the body, the mind, and in decisions made under pressure. That's why so many people work harder, get more tired, take on more responsibilities, and yet remain in the same place. Not because they aren't evolving professionally, but because they're trapped in an emotional logic of how they use money. Every choice made to ease the present exacts a silent price in the future. Installments replace time off, commitments replace leeway, and the space for reflection disappears. Over time, this generates frustration and confusion. The person looks back and realizes they worked hard, but doesn't feel secure, and that hurts, because it seems unfair. But the problem isn't the effort, it's the mistaken interpretation of what progress means. Growing income without changing your mindset only increases the size of the machine that needs to be fed every month. The burden grows along with it. When you begin to see this pattern more clearly, something reorganizes itself internally. It becomes evident that money wasn't being used as a tool for building, but as a mechanism for enhanced survival. The journey stops seeming confusing and starts to make sense. Not because it became easy, but because now the root of the problem is visible. And when the root appears, it opens up space for different, more conscious, less impulsive choices. This understanding doesn't solve everything at once, but it changes direction. It separates movement from progress. It shows that earning more isn't enough when the internal logic remains the same. And it's precisely at this point that the conversation begins to touch on something deeper, because recognizing this psychological error isn't comfortable, but it's the first step to breaking free from the cycle of constant exhaustion and starting to build something that goes beyond the present. At the end of this section, leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is where the mental shift happens that truly separates those who merely improve their lives from those who consistently build wealth. When you carefully observe how wealthy people think, you realize there's no emotional rush in their decisions. There's logic, intention, and a clear understanding of the impact of each choice throughout the journey. Wealthy people don't organize their lives to sustain an ever-increasing lifestyle. They organize their lives to protect their profit margin. This difference seems small, but it changes absolutely everything. Behind this mindset, money is never used as emotional anesthesia. It doesn't serve to compensate for a bad day, alleviate frustrations, or justify excessive sacrifices. It's treated as a tool to create time, predictability, and freedom of choice. Therefore, before thinking about comfort, those who think differently think about accumulation, not out of greed, but out of clarity. There's an awareness that comfort without a foundation exacts a silent price in the future, and wealthy people learn this early, even if they can't explain it in sophisticated words. This logic appears very simply in the questions that guide decisions. The common mindset looks at a choice and thinks, "Can I afford it?" If the answer is yes, the decision seems resolved. The wealthy mindset, however, pauses and asks something deeper. Does this increase or decrease my future freedom? This question shifts the focus of the decision. It takes the focus away from the present and places it on the impact. Money ceases to be an impulse and becomes a strategy, and it is precisely this type of reasoning that investors like Warren Buffett have always defended in an almost uncomfortably simple way. When this shift begins to happen, decisions become slower, but much more coherent. Money ceases to be an automatic reaction and begins to obey a clear logic. The person begins to see each expense, each commitment, and each choice as part of a larger system. What once seemed like deprivation begins to make sense as construction. What once seemed like a delay begins to be understood as preparation. And this transformation doesn't happen from the outside in, but within the mindset that guides daily decisions. Another important point is that wealthy people don't seek to appear wealthy. They seek to be free. The impact of this appears in how they deal with comparison, social pressure, and external expectations. There is no urgency to show immediate results. There is patience to let time work. And this patience doesn't stem from comfort, but from clarity. Clarity that real wealth lies not in high consumption, but in having greater control over one's own future. This way of thinking completely changes your relationship with money. Anxiety decreases because decisions are no longer made impulsively. The feeling of control increases because there is room for maneuver. The journey ceases to be a sophisticated survival game and becomes a conscious process of building. It's not flashy, it doesn't make for quick stories, but it creates stability behind the scenes of real life. When you start observing this pattern more closely, it becomes clear that the difference between those who move forward and those who get stuck isn't in grand, spectacular decisions, but in small adjustments repeated over time. Adjustments in mindset, in questions, in priorities. Money begins to obey a different logic, a quieter and more strategic one. And it is precisely this shift that explains why some manage to move forward consistently, while others, even with great effort, remain trapped in the feeling of always playing catch-up. This understanding doesn't end the journey, but it completely changes the starting point. It prepares the inner ground for more mature choices, less emotional and more aligned with long-term freedom. When this mindset begins to solidify, the path ceases to seem confusing and begins to gain direction, opening space for even deeper reflections on how to transform effort into real progress. At the end of this section, write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because understanding why you feel poor even when earning more is one of the most delicate parts of this journey. At some point, income increases, The standard of living improves. Certain achievements finally happen, but inside nothing stabilizes. The unease remains. There's always a feeling that something could go wrong at any moment. And this isn't ingratitude or inconsistency. It's a sign that the root of the problem isn't in the numbers, but in the invisible structure that underpins your decisions. The feeling of poverty often stems from a lack of financial leeway. When everything that comes in already has a predetermined purpose, when every penny arrives committed, there's no room to breathe. Any unforeseen event becomes a threat, any decision requires immediate calculation, any mistake seems fatal. The mind enters a state of constant alert. There is no silence, there is no pause. Financial life becomes a sequence of reactions, and reacting all the time is more exhausting than earning little. The impact of this isn't just on money. It invades the emotional, the physical, the way you see the future. The lack of control deepens this discomfort. When money slips through your hands without generating a sense of ownership, your mind loses its bearings. You work, you strive, you fulfill obligations, but you can't clearly predict the next steps. Without predictability, there is no mental rest. Each new month begins as a test of endurance, as if everything depended on things working out again. This creates a burdensome journey, where progress always seems temporary and security never truly arrives. There's a hidden truth here that completely changes the way we read history. Financial security isn't a calculation, it's a feeling. It's not about how much you earn, it's about how much room you feel you have to make mistakes, decide, and adjust. Those who lack this margin are always reacting. They react to bills, deadlines, problems, and opportunities. They don't build, they only respond. And living like that creates profound emotional poverty, because the future always seems unstable, even when income grows. That's why so many people feel like they're always behind, even when they're making progress. The body carries tension, the mind carries worry, and money never fulfills its role of bringing tranquility. The phrase hurts because it's true. Emotional poverty with money hurts more than numerical poverty. It wears you down inside, creates guilt, confusion, and a constant feeling of inadequacy. It seems like it's never enough, no matter how much you improve externally. This pain doesn't stem from a lack of effort, but from a lack of structure. When everything is urgent, nothing is strategic. When there's no predictability, each decision weighs more than it should. And the more you grow without creating space, the more this feeling intensifies. It's like climbing steps that never reach a firm platform. Transformation begins when you realize that discomfort isn't a sign of failure, but a warning that something needs to be reorganized. From this understanding, something begins to change from within. The way we look at money transforms. Our relationship with time changes. Decisions are now observed with more awareness, not because everything has been resolved, but because the root of the problem is now visible. And when the root appears, the possibility arises of building true security, based not only on income, but on margin, control, and predictability. This understanding doesn't end the journey, but it completely changes the starting point. It prepares the inner ground for calmer, more intentional, and less reactive choices. It is in this newly created space that money gradually ceases to be a source of anxiety and becomes an instrument of stability. And it is precisely from this silent change that new decisions begin to gain weight, paving the way for the next level of this conversation. At the end of this section, leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a simple, almost silent adjustment that completely changes the direction of this journey. It's not a complex technique nor a difficult concept to understand. It's a change of question. For a long time, most financial decisions have been guided by something seemingly logical. How much can I spend? This question seems responsible, mature, even prudent. But in practice, it pushes all choices to the limit of the present. It organizes life around possible consumption, not necessary building. As long as this question is at the center, the future is always squeezed, always postponed. The transformation begins when this logic is replaced by another much more powerful question. How much do I need to save? At that moment, something changes inside. Saving is not about punishing yourself. It's not about living in scarcity. It's not about denying yourself comfort forever. Saving is about creating space. It's about ensuring that money fulfills a role beyond simply easing immediate needs. It's about allowing each decision to have a positive impact not only today, but also tomorrow. When this question begins to guide choices, money ceases to be a nervous flow and becomes a silent structure. This adjustment happens before any investment, before any sophisticated strategy, before any promise of quick multiplication. Getting rich in the truest sense begins long before investing. It begins with the mindset that guides small, repeated, almost invisible decisions. It begins with how you deal with income increases, extra expenses, and choices that no one sees. There are no shortcuts here. There are no magic formulas that replace clarity. What exists is intention applied consistently. When you start preserving, something reorganizes itself internally. Anxiety decreases because the future ceases to be a constant threat. Decisions become easier because they are no longer made under pressure. The journey gains coherence. You begin to understand that financial freedom doesn't come from giant leaps, but from small adjustments made consciously over time. Adjustments that don't attract attention, don't yield external validation, but build something solid behind the scenes of real life. This type of transformation doesn't promise speed, but it delivers direction. It doesn't offer glamour, but it generates peace of mind. It's the clarity of knowing that each choice is aligned with something bigger, even when the result isn't yet visible. The mindset changes, the decisions change, and the impact begins to accumulate silently. Money starts to obey a different logic, calmer, more strategic, less emotional. When this clarity sets in, the path begins to open up naturally, not because everything has become easy, but because now there is room to think before deciding. There is room to make mistakes without collapsing. There is enough predictability to breathe, and it is precisely this space that allows money to stop being just a source of worry and start becoming a real tool for building. This change doesn't happen overnight, nor does it solve everything immediately, but it changes the starting point. It changes how you look at each choice. It changes the weight of decisions, and little by little it transforms effort into real progress. When the right question begins to guide, the way the journey ceases to be reactive and begins to gain direction, preparing the ground for even deeper and more conscious choices. At the end of this section, write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." If you've made it this far, it's because this conversation has truly stayed with you until the end. And if all of this has helped you see money more clearly, rethink choices, or better understand this silent discomfort, subscribing to the channel is a simple way to continue having access to this type of content. The idea here is not to complicate things or sell shortcuts, but to share practical reflections that make a difference in real life. If you'd like, leave a comment saying you made it to the end. You can write, "This message was for me," or "I'm with you until the end." This helps to show that the conversation made sense and creates a space where people going through similar phases can recognize each other. And if throughout the video you felt a connection with what was said, the like ends up being just a natural gesture of recognition for that shared time. There's a video over here that complements this topic and delves even deeper into this way of thinking about money. Click on it and continue with me there, at the same pace.